usual because a korban mincha usually comes from wheat. Then 7 weeks later, on Shavuos, you have the shtei halechem, the two breads that are brought on Shavuos. Very unique type of korban. It's also a korban mincha, and those two breads are made out of wheat. Our Sforim HaKadoshim teach us that there's a certain aliyah that happens from Pesach to Shavuos. Barley, the Chachamim refer to as Meichel Behema, which means animal food. Doesn't mean people don't eat it, but B'derech Klal, it's called animal food. Wheat, however, is a more elevated form of grain. That's called Meichel Adam, human food. So there's a type of aliyah where we go from more, let's say, animal type of tendencies to higher human tendencies from Pesach to Shavuos, Matan Torah. And the ikar of this process, of this journey, is Sfiras HaOmer. So that's what we want to look into, that aliyah, that process as to how that occurs. The central theme of Sfiras HaOmer is Tikkun HaMidos. Tikkun HaMidos means for a person to improve, rectify, purify their character traits, which is, of course, a lifelong process, and also something that we're doing each and every day of our life, Bezras Hashem, except during these 7 weeks, there's a special siyata dishmaya where we're able to engage in Tikkun HaMidos in a more powerful way, or in a way that's more accessible to us because of the Zman itself. There are 7 weeks of Sfiras HaOmer, Sheva Shabbosos Tamimos Tihiana. So what are the 7 midos? First I'll say them and then I'll talk about it. Chesed, Gevura, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, Malchus. Those are the 7 midos. They appear many times in Judaism. One other example, for example, is on Sukkot. We have Ushpizin in our Sukkah each night. They are the Shiva Roim, the 7 shepherds of Israel. Who are they? Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Moshe, Aaron, Yosef, David. And they correspond to those same 7 midos. Chesed, Gevura, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, Malchus. You also have the 7 days of the week. On a regular basis, that cycle of 7 are those 7 midos as well. Let's take a look at them. It's not sufficient to translate with a one-word translation of the midos, because the midos are fluid. They have to do with the human personality, so by definition, they're not one-dimensional. They are filled with very rich meaning. So I'm going to describe them in a way where we'll be using more than one word to try and get a conceptual definition of the midah that we won't be stuck to, because it's not a black and white topic, but will give us an approach to each midah. Chesed. First week of Sfira is the week of Chesed. Chesed, usually translated kindness, love, giving, sometimes even loving kindness. And the idea there of that midah is it's going outward. The midah of Chesed is a human being going out from themselves to another person, usually through an act of giving. It could also be through a kind word. It could be through teaching, but it's outward Chesed. That's the midah of Avram Avinu, where he extended himself literally to all of humanity in order to teach them about HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Chesed is the first midah. as the pasuk says, Olam Chesed Yibana. The world is built on Chesed. So not only did Hashem create the world as an act of kindness toward human beings, but when the Jewish people get started, it also begins with Chesed. The world of Yahadus begins with Chesed. Avraham Avinu is the midah of Chesed. That's the first week of Sfira. The second week of Sfira, we're working on Gevura. The Gevura is a little bit of a tricky word because people translate it sometimes as strength or power. And I would not say that that's inaccurate. I would say it is accurate, but it's too general. Because Gevura refers to a certain kind of strength and power, which is the power to restrain. Ezahu Gibor HaKovesh Es Yitzhar. Who is a Gibor? The one who conquers their Yetzer Hara, which means they're tempted to do something they should not do. Al Pi Torasenu HaKadosha, they shouldn't do that. And they hold themselves back. It's an act of restraint. So Gibor, Gevura, is holding back, restraining. Let's put a few more words on it. Boundaries. Gevura has to do with establishing boundaries. Each one of us up there on the screen has our own little square, right? That's a boundary. Little rectangle that appears on the screen. That's the boundary. That's the Gevura of our little place on this screen. In the human personality, Gevura are the boundaries that we place on our midos, because any healthy midah must have boundaries. If it has no boundaries, it becomes chaos or wild or all over the place. Gevura is boundaries. Let's put another word on it. Definition. To define. So Gevura, restraint, holding back, setting boundaries, definition. That's Yitzchak Avinu. How do we often refer to the Akedas Yitzchak? He's the one who was tied up by Avraham Avinu. What does Yitzchak say? The Chachamim tell us. He knows he's a korban at this point. He says to Avraham Avinu, his father, make sure to tie me up because I might flinch. And if I flinch, I'll passel the korban. What is tying up? Holding back, restraint, Gevura. To be in a position where you can't go forward. Akedas Yitzchak. That's the conceptual idea of Yitzchak and Gevura with those boundaries. Let's look at the third week of Sfira, Tiferes. Tiferes is often translated as beauty. Also, I would say not a bad translation, but way too general for us to really get a handle on it relative to working on our midos. The beauty is a very big word. So what are we talking about? We're going to go with the understanding of the Baal HaTanya, Rav Shneur Zalman of Leidi, the first Rabbi of Lubavitch, one of the great students of the Maggid of Mezerich. And the Baal HaTanya writes in his Sefer HaTanya that the midah of Tiferes means blending, harmonizing. He uses an example of color. You have different colors, you blend those colors together, you have a nice picture. That's the midah of Tiferes. Let's also choose a musical example. You're playing a violin, that's nice. You're playing a violin and a piano, you're playing a violin, a piano, and a bass. Now that's Tiferes, because you got three instruments that are all contributing to the same piece of music, and they're blending with each other. That's harmonious beauty. That's the midah of Tiferes. What is the koach of Tiferes in the human personality? It's the ability to blend together our different midos so they function in a holistic way. Because no midah ever really is operating by itself. The human personality is way too complex for that. There's all kinds of layers to our personality. So in this respect, the midah of Tiferes is the ability to blend and harmonize our midos together. Yaakov Avinu blends the chesed of Avram, the gevura of Yitzchak. That's the midah of Tiferes. I'll just tell you a nice little thing in my own life. As we'll see in a couple minutes, the midos are broken down even further than this. So the third night of the week of Tiferes is called Tiferes Shebetiferes. We'll talk about that soon. The name of my shul here in Baltimore is called Tiferes Yisroel. So I like to say that when we count that night of Sfira, we're talking Tiferes Shebetiferes Yisroel. A lot of Tiferes going on in one shot. Okay, that's the third week of Sfira. The fourth week of Sfira is the one we're in right now. The fourth midah, Netzach. Netzach also has many meanings to it. The word means eternity or eternal, like we say, Lanetzach Nitzachim, or Nitzchius is eternity. The word also means to overcome, to overpower, to be victorious. If we say that we are menatseach over something or somebody, we have been victorious over that. Now let's take it a little more focused on that midah. I'd go with the words perseverance, dedication, fortitude. Because when a person wants to accomplish something, they have to go at it, and they have to go at it. How many times in your life can you think about that you're working on something and you have to do it day in and day out and day in and day out before you really get somewhere? And finally, after a long period of time, you get there to where you want it to be, and you are menatseach. That's a kind of dedication and perseverance. That's the midah of Netzach, which corresponds to Moshe Rabbeinu in midos. The next midah is Hod. Hod will often be translated in English as glory or splendor. I don't like the word splendor because it reminds me of an artificial sugar. And nothing in midos should be artificial. So we're not going to go with that word. The word glory is also, once again, way too general for what we need in terms of midos. The midah of Hod, thankfulness, gratitude. Toda means thank you. Couple more words, to recognize, to acknowledge. We would say to be modeh. If I'm modeh, I admit or I recognize something. So all of those things are good ways to try and get a handle on the midah of Hod: gratitude, thankfulness, appreciation, recognition, acknowledgement. That's the place of that midah of Hod. How important is that to us? Extremely. We are Yehudim. Our name is related to the word Hod. The very first word that a Jewish person says every single day of their life, the moment they wake up, is Modeh. Thank you. Modani lefanecha melech chai v'kayim. Thank you, Hashem, for bringing me back, sending me back my neshama. We even say thank you before we wash Negelwasser. Negelwasser is important. You have to wash off the tumah that rests on our hands as a result of sleep. And sleep is a little bit of a taste of death. It leaves some tumah with it. The Chachamim say it's 1/60th of death. That's the fraction that they use when they say something is me'ain, a little bit of something, they say 1/60th. So that remains on our hands. You have to wash it off your hands to proceed throughout the day in a state of tahara. We say thank you even before we do that. As important it is to wash off that tumah from our hands, it's even more important to say modeh. Jews are very much about gratitude, thankfulness, and appreciation. That is the midah of Aaron HaKohen, Hod. The next midah is Yesod, week number 6 of Sphira. Just by the way, tonight's Midah, I can't say the number yet because I didn't count Sphira yet, and I don't want to put myself in a position of a Safek Bracha. But the Midah of tonight is Netzach Shebenetzach. We'll talk about that shortly. Midah 6, Yesod. Yesod means foundation. But in terms of Avodas Hashem and Midos, Yesod is really talking about appropriate sexuality. The Midah of Yesod is all about that. And the idea being that there is a Kedusha in the relationship between a husband and a wife. And that Kedusha in their relationship is related to the Midah of Yesod. Now, Yesod has 2 dimensions to it. One is restraint. So, for example, there's a time of the month when a husband and wife cannot be together physically, not permitted. She goes to the mikveh, now they can be together again. So on one side, it's to know how to restrain and to step back from the physical relationship and develop the relationship in many other ways that are not physical. Then, once husband and wife are permitted to each other, now it's about sanctifying that togetherness and doing so in a way which is kind and sensitive and creates intimacy in the relationship between a husband and wife. This is Yesodistic, like the word implies, to Yiddishkeit. We are Jews. We don't believe in celibacy. We believe in sanctifying the marriage between a man and a woman, a husband and wife. And we say, when they're underneath the chuppah, Mekadesh Amo Yisrael Al Yidei Chuppah V'Kiddushin. There is holiness in this relationship. That represents something very, very broad and expansive, because any type of physical indulgence, like eating, for example, is also underneath this canopy because it involves physical pleasure. And as Jews, once again, when it comes to physical pleasure, our approach to that is to partake in a sanctified way. No gluttony and no asceticism. We're right there in the proper balance between enjoying the physical world in the way that Hashem wants us to, and by doing that, uplifting it in our avodas Hashem. That's the midah of Yesod, both between husband and wife, and also in general regards to pleasures of the world. The last midah is Malchus, week number 7 of Sphira. Another hard word, translating it in English, kingship, dominion. Those are words that don't leave us with a lot of help relative to Tikkun HaMidos. I'm going to use another word, which I'll share with you in a moment. Malchus, Melech or Malka, king or queen. What is a king or a queen? What are they able to do? Well, they can make decrees. Right? Not only that, because they're a king or a queen, they can carry out the decree. Now, I could make a decree tonight. I could walk out on my front porch and I can make a decree that everybody now has to drive less than 30 miles per hour. But guess what? Nobody will listen to me because I'm not a melech. But if I were a king and I made that decree, people would have to listen. So what's the idea? It's the ability to make a decree and carry it out. The word I like to use for that is actualization. The midah of Malchus, in my opinion, means to actualize. So all these other midos that we're talking about, they ultimately must come into fruition to manifest themselves in our lives. When they all come together and we express something, that's the midah of Malchus. The final form that something takes is the midah of Malchus. Actualization, that's what we're trying to ultimately accomplish. Okay, now we look at those 7 midos. maybe they mean something, I hope, a little more meaningful to us, and there's more depth now. Chesed, Gevura, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, Malchus. Each week of Sfira, we're working on one of those mitos. Now let's go a little deeper, and then after we do that, I'd like to hear if you have any questions or comments. Very much like to hear your question. I'm going to go one step deeper, maybe two. Each one of the 7 midos is made up of all 7. I'll say it again. Each one of the 7 midos is made up of all 7. So therefore, let's just go with the first week, the week of Chesed. Day number 1 of that week is Chesed within Chesed. Day number 2 of that week is Gevura within Chesed. Day number 3 is Tiferes within Chesed. Day number 4 is Netzach within Chesed, known as Shebe Chesed. Day number 5 is Hod, Shebe Chesed. Day number 6 is Yesod, Shebe Chesed. Day number 7 is Malchus, Shebe Chesed. So the dominant midah of week number 1 is Chesed, but every dominant midah has flavors and nuances, sub-qualities, which are the mini midos operating within the larger midah. Here's a mashal. Quite a few years ago, one of my sons, at that time was a boy. Now all my kids are adults, Kin and Hora. He was a boy. I took him out to Goldberg's Bagels, not Goldberger, Goldberg's Bagels. I don't own it. And we had a little lunch together. I asked him what he wanted to drink. He said a blueberry smoothie. Great. Got the blueberry smoothie out of the cooler there. And at that time, this son of mine, he was really into reading ingredients. So he's reading the ingredient panel of the blueberry smoothie, and he sees, of course, blueberry puree, but then he sees strawberry, orange, apple. So he says to me, hold on a second, this is blueberry puree. Why is there strawberry and orange and apple? I thought it was blueberry. So I said to him, no, blueberry is the main flavor. Does it taste like blueberry? He said, yeah, it tastes like blueberry. Blueberry is the main flavor. What you want to do with the main flavor of blueberry is you have to bring out the flavor by throwing in a few other lesser flavors that actually help out bring the big flavor. So a little bit of strawberry, a little bit of orange, a little bit of apple, and they're in there somewhere. If you had a fine puree palate, you could detect the strawberry and the orange too. But the dominant flavor is blueberry. I love that mashal because it's mamish what we're talking about. Week number 1 of Chesed, the dominant midah is Chesed. But in that Chesed, you got a little bit of Gevura, a little bit of Tiferes, a little bit of Netzach. They're all in there. So let's go back to our statement. Each one of the 7 midos is made up of all 7. Let's talk about that in 2 ways. Week number 1, Chesed. Okay, kindness, giving, putting forth. What does Gevura Shebe Chesed mean? This has very strong implications to our life. In the midah of Chesed, where a person is giving, if they give and give and give with no boundaries, they end up with problems. Personal problems because they're too overextended. Problems with other people like, hey, that's too much. That's too much. You're coming on too strong. So problems for themselves, problems for others. So in order to really be an emistika Baal Chesed, you have to put some Gevura on your Chesed. You got to put some boundaries on your Chesed. Then you'll be a true Baal Chesed. In the language of Chassidus said to me by my Rabbi, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, Harav Shlomo Tversky, who was the Hornistipler Rebbe in Denver where I grew up, he said, If a midah operates by itself with no balance, the midah goes to the sitra achra. That means to say, if the midah is not balanced out with other midos, it goes to the tzad of Ra in the world. In the extreme, chesed with no boundaries is gilui arayos. That's how far it can go. Doesn't have to go that far, though, to make it somewhat dysfunctional. Because chesed with no gevura, like we said, is not a healthy thing for ourselves or for others. Similarly, you're raising children. If you're all chesed with your kids, you got spoiled children. We got children who expect the world. They got everything coming to them. But if we know how to hold back with our chesed, that's a lifelong lesson how to do these things, of course, then our chesed becomes much more real, much more balanced, and a chesed which for our children is healthy. That's all gevura, sheba chesed. The gevura modifies the chesed. Now let's flip it around. The midah of gevura, let's say that's the dominant trait. So restraint, the ability to hold back, boundaries, definition. So we're talking about holding back. What happens if a person has no chesed in their gevura, their kulo gevura? Once again, it goes to the tzad of the sitra achra. In the extreme sense, gevura with no chesed is shfichas damim. That's Esav. Esav is Yitzchak Avinu's midah of gevura, which is out of control. Shfichas damim. Chesed should be gevura is that if gevura is to be real, healthy, it has to be tempered with kindness and love. My 12th grade Rabbi, Zertzadik Livracha, his name was Rav Hirsch Eisenberg. He was a Holocaust survivor. One of my most outstanding teachers in high school, a person who had a very profound influence on my life. In the classroom, very strict, very strict. We were almost afraid to breathe. Very strict. But we all knew he loved us, he cared about us, and he was there for us. We all knew that. He was able to convey in that strictness of personality and the strictness of the atmosphere of the classroom. He was a very gevuridic type of person in the classroom, but he was able to convey the chesed within his gevura. And we all knew it, and therefore it was meaningful. That kind of gevura is balanced, tempered. That's chesed should be gevura. Let's put it now in the parental realm. You're a parent, you need to teach your kids boundaries. Okay, we're trying to do that. But if it's boundaries, 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 what does that become? Rigidity, inflexibility. That turns people off. It turns kids off. That's one of the ways to drive kids away. Chas v'shalom. Al gevura, no chesed. If a child, whether it be a student or a child of a parent, is a recipient of gevura, there's got to be chesed, ava, interlaced with that gevura, surrounding that gevura. This is a very difficult thing to master, as we all know. But that's what we're striving for, tikkun hamidos. The right dose of gevura, tempered by chesed, that's chesed, should be gevura. Each one of these things has its own night of Sfiras HaOmer, total 49 different combinations. Now you get to some of them and you kind of wonder, what does this mean? What does Tiferes of the Netzach mean? Okay, so now you have an assignment for the rest of our lives. We're going to try and figure out what do those midos mean. If you have a Nusach Sfard Siddur, or in some Nusach Ashkenaz Siddur, after Sfiras HaOmer, you'll see a little chart of each day of Sfira and what Midah that day represents. If you have an art scroll sitter, both Nusach Sfard and Nusach Ashkenaz has the chart, and the Midah of that day, the very specific Midah of that day, is written there. It's a nice way to keep track of it, along with the tefillah at the end about the tikkun of that particular Midah. That's the course of Sfiras HaOmer, Tikkun Hamidos, the journey from the second night of Pesach till Shavuos, from Sa'orim to Chitim, from Michael Behema to Michael Adam. And as the Gaon of Vilna wrote, and is written in Eben Shlema, the ikar of the human life is Tikkun Hamidos. And then the Gemara says, and if we don't engage in Tikkun Hamidos, Lama Lo Chaim, why even live? If we're not going to be Masakin Hamidos, what's the purpose of life? That's how important it is. And Torah, which we're heading toward, Shavuos, Matan Torah, Torah requires from each and every one of us Midos Tovos. The more we develop our Midos, the more the Torah HaKadosha wants to be part of us. When we work on our personality and the Torah sees that, the Torah says, I want to be with that person. That man or that woman, they're working on themselves. That's where I want to be. Tikkun HaMidos, in the words of Rav Chaim Vital, it's brought down in Nesiva Shalom, it is the Merkava, it is the vehicle through which Torah rests on us. For Yidden, Torah and Midos are inseparable. They have to come together. If we separate them, we're not doing something Jewish anymore. When we have it together, that's Yiddishkeit. They have to come together. Okay, those are my words that I wanted to share with you tonight. If you have any questions, comments, I'd be more than happy to hear your questions or your comments. There's one question. That's for you, Rabbitzin. Thank you for the Asher Koach. Much appreciated.
Thank you so much for joining us, Rabbi Goldberger. I have a question.
Great.
For a few years, when I had a little bit more time on my hands, I was trying to learn this very esoteric sefer about Sfiras HaOmer. Whatever. I mean, it's not super esoteric, but like it is when you read it, and like each midah is divided up, and then regal small and regal yamin, and try to do this. And like I would try to pick out like something specific and practical that I could do, but for some of them, it seems like very hard to find like a specific practical thing that I'm supposed to be doing on each day, as opposed to, yeah. Yeah,
exactly. So some of them are a little more concrete, like the ones I mentioned, Chesed should be Gevurah, Gevurah should be Chesed, like a little more concrete, able to get your hands on it much better. And other ones are very difficult to try and figure out. That's part of the interesting intrigue of Sfiras HaOmer, just what this exactly means. But there's a nice book by Rabbi Yaakov Haber of Ramat Beit Shemesh, used to be here in America. It's called Sephiros. It's not too esoteric where you can't relate to it. Mm-hmm. It's very nicely done. It describes the midos and his way of mapping them out, and a very practical way to work on the midah of that particular day. I would recommend it. It's a very nice book, Sephiros, Rabbi Yaakov Haber.
Okay.
Now, another thing I want to mention here is that, also tying into the Rebbitzins question, none of this is stationary. Because it's midos, it moves around. It's a human personality. So what I'm thinking about is chesed on one particular night could be and should be probably a little different than chesed the next night. because the midah is rich and deep and it's moving. So we don't want to tie ourselves too much down to this means this. It's more so an approach and a feel for it, and then trying to apply that feel. I'll give you one more example, Rebbetzin. Next week, Lag BaOmer, in the 5th week of Sfira, which is the Midah of Hod. In the Midah, in the 5th week of Sfira, there are 2 Yom Tovim. Pesach Sheni is on Chesed Sheba Hod, and Lag BaOmer is Hod Sheba Hod. Let's talk about Hod Sheba Hod for a minute. And remember, every Midah of the 7 has one night where the sub-Midah is equal to the grand Midah. Chesed Sheba Chesed. Gevura Shebi Gevura. Tiferet Shebi Tiferet. Tonight, Netzach Sheba Netzach. Next week, Hod Sheba Hod, Lag BaOmer. Here's an approach. It's an approach. You have the Midah, and then you have what I'm going to call the super Midah. So Hod is the ability to be thankful, to show gratitude, to recognize. Hod Sheba Hod is to really understand where that's coming from and to truly say thank you to the source of all blessing, which is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So perhaps one way to look at Hod Sheba Hod is the first level is the gratitude I have toward people and the blessings I have in my life. Hod, saying thank you. Hod Sheba Hod is taking it one step deeper. Where does it all come from? Ribbon Shalom. Chesed Sheba Chesed. One is acting kind to people. Chesed Sheba Chesed, perhaps, another way to look at this midah, is the concentration within oneself on the midah of chesed and its importance in order for us to become ba'alei chesed. So chesed is the act of chesed. Chesed Sheba Chesed is the fixing on the significance of the midah in order to carry the midah out. So that's a mahalach. When it comes to those kinds of midos, the midah sheba midah, the chesed sheba chesed, gevura sheba gevura, to try and look at it on one level and then break it down to its next deeper level. If you kind of train your mind to start thinking about the midos in these terms and in their sub-terms, you start to get used to the idea of looking at the midos in that way. And then, believe it or not, it starts to come a little bit naturally. But it takes a lot of hard work. Those are some thoughts on that, Rebbetzin.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. Anybody else? Question?
I have another one, but I'll wait to see if anyone else
Let's go
does.
for it. Okay.
So the working on the different midos and their subtypes, as opposed to like, okay, I know I need to work on X right now. Like, is it, okay, I'm going to work on my patience with my kids now, and I'm going to try to tie it into each of these midos, or like, I don't know if that's like a very clear question, but like,
No,
I know I need to work on this right now. So do I just go with that and I'm just working on my patience now, or should I be like trying to tie it in with all these things, or, you know, looking for ways that it connects to those things?
Great. So I want to say both, and then this is what I mean. If it becomes too complicated, we're not going to really do it, and we're not going to get anywhere with it. So what I often say to people and say to myself as a people, that just work on chesed. Don't think about chesed, sheba chesed, gevura sheba chesed. I can't figure that out right now. Just try and do an act of chesed today. The Chavetz Chaim says in Avas Chesed, we should do an act of chesed every single day of our life. That's a very valid thing to do. Just work on chesed. Next week, I'm going to work on Gevura. I need to hold myself back in certain situations. I want to try and do that. Very valid, very important. We all got to do that. It's the basics. So patience, okay? Want to work on patience. Very important midah. Patience has some gevura in it because you have to be misgaber on yourself in order to be a patient person. We're not oftentimes naturally patient. We get impatient, so that requires some gevura in there. And start to focus in gevura, patience. So level number one, working on patience, very important. Then if you can, connect it to a midah or a nuanced midah, then matov u'manoim. So here's one. Tiferes is also called rachamim. Those midos have very much related to each other, but that's a whole other conversation. If I want to have patience with another person, and let's say I'm going to call that gevura, because I need to be misgaber to have patience. One way to be able to do that is rachamim sheba tiferens, or rachamim sheba patience. The rachamim in patience. If I can have compassion on another person, rachamim, true compassion, I will find I can be a more patient person. Patience depends oftentimes on our perception of the person we're trying to be patient with. How do we know that? Because with that person, I'm very patient. With this person, whoa, I can't be so patient. Pushes my buttons. So I got to employ some rachamim over there to understand that person, what they're going through, and now I'm much more able to be a patient person with them. So in that, we're able to apply the midah of patience, gevura. I'm using them right now interchangeably. It's not truly the case, but just for the sake of this discussion. And rachamim brings out my ability to be patient. And I think you can find that each midah is like that. Chesed can bring out our ability to be patient. I want to be kind to that person, and I can be kind to them by being more patient. So those are ways to kind of tuck it in to a midah or a sub-midah, work on the general midah that we have, but sometimes able to manage it, get to it at a more specific level.
Great, thank you.
Absolutely. Okay.
Okay, thank you so much, Rabbi Goldberger, for joining us. This was really wonderful to be in your class again.
Nice to have you in class again.
Okay, call two.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Rebbitzin, very much. And thank you to everybody who came tonight. A pleasure meeting you on screen, maybe one day in person. And wishing you all good things. I'm going to check out. Maybe you guys have some things to talk about. So I'll head out. Thank you, Rebbitzin.
I'm just going to, Rabbi Goldberger, I'm just going to tell you in the chat box, people are just saying thank you. So
Oh, great.
just relating that.
Thanks
Alrighty,
a lot.
thank you so much. Have a good night, call two.
Thank you too. All the best, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you for sending the link.
Torah, how are you?
Good. Baruch Hashem. I didn't know how this would pan out because my baby basically got put down for a nap at 4:30 something when I came home from work because she didn't nap with the babysitter and she just couldn't make it till bedtime. And she's been sleeping since then. So I don't know what to expect tonight. But
Oh my goodness.
I didn't feed her first, nothing, just put her down and she went right to sleep. So we might have an interesting night.
Right. Right. You might be up for a little while.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Did I send you the link?
Yes, you did, and I didn't get a chance to respond.
Hey,
Thank you.
no, because like I'm like trying to think like, okay, who went to Ma'alot? Who's gonna want to hear? You know?
Yeah, thank you.
I sent it, whatever, a bunch of people couldn't come, but such is life. How have you been?
Baruch Hashem. Doing
Oh,
fine.
1 second, Sephora, hold on.
Oh wait, should I like?